So every time Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the head of the Department of Homeland Security, who's supposed to be in charge of securing the border, was hauled before Congress or before the Senate, and they asked him, why is the border open? He would say to their faces, our corporations are desperate for workers. It has become the Democrats' party line that without a caste of slaves, our economy cannot survive. And it's absolutely appalling because there is a direct correlation between downward mobility for the working class and the rise of immigrants.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's your man Wise, and we got to check out this clip from the Trigonometry podcast. We have Batya Ungar-Sargon. She sits down with Konstantin Kizin, and she absolutely shuts the podcast down with the truth. You guys got to hear it for yourself. We're going to get into it. I'm going to let it play, but I'm going to insert my thoughts, my opinions as we go. Like, share, subscribe. Let's get into it.
Few people in the world who says that the polarization that everyone's talking about in America and maybe in other Western countries too isn't really happening. What are you talking about?
I'm actually not that unique. I'm unique, I guess, in the elites and the chattering class to have that view. And the reason for that is because the people pushing the fact that we're polarized as a reality are the people who are making a lot of money off of that idea and getting a lot of power off of that idea. So it's elites in the media, elites in politics, social media companies. But the truth is when you look at polling and when you talk to average Americans, regular working class Americans, middle class Americans, as I did in my book, you find that there is huge, massive consensus on the issues that we think of as the most contentious, most divisive issues. And this has been hidden from view because the people telling the story about this nation have a vested interest in pushing the idea that we're polarized when nothing could be further from the truth. So I'll just give you a few easy examples. Abortion, right? Looks like this is a country at each other's throats. People are pro-life, people are pro-choice. You look at the polling and half the nation says, I'm pro-life, and half the nation says, I'm pro-choice. But if you dig down into those numbers, 65% of people who say that they're pro-choice, they only want abortion to be legal for the first trimester. So 12 to 15 weeks. And the people who say they're pro-life, 92% of them say there should be exceptions for rape, incest, and the health of the mother. So you're already looking at, there's a position here that has 80% support among the American electorate. And of course, this is totally hidden from view because you have politicians on the right pushing for total abortion bans with no exceptions, and politicians on the left who effectively refuse to say, okay, at what point should it be illegal to have an abortion? What is the upper limit on that? The same thing is true of, you look at guns. Most Americans are pro-gun and pro-background checks and reasonable gun legislation. Most Americans are pro-life, but anti-ban. They don't want to see abortion get banned, even if they would say to you, as many of the people in the book said to me, I myself would never get an abortion, but I would never take that right away from a woman whose circumstances I don't particularly understand. There's a sort of radical moderateness threading itself through the American working class. Most working class Americans, everybody I interviewed for my book, and again, polling backs this up, want much fewer immigrants and much more access to health care. So again, neither party is representing that point of view. You've got one party that says, okay, we'll talk about access to health care and expanding that, but we believe in an open border. And then the other party that says, well, we believe in closing the border. We believe in having really stricter immigration laws, but they'll never say the word healthcare except as a slur. And so you really had the working class, this sort of vast American middle, 65% of Americans with these extremely moderate views sort of falling between the two parties. And that's really where I think a lot of Donald Trump's support comes from. He's not a conservative. He really did sort of look at that sort of forgotten middle, both from an ideological point of view and from an economic point of view, and say, okay, what can we do for these people? How can we represent them?
Do you think the reason that it almost sounds...
I'll say this, and I agree with everything that she said. As someone that is a pro-life, but I'm also one of those people that think that, hey, if there are some circumstances out there that exist, if that's what you would like to do, I don't necessarily see the issue within the, first trimester. My problem with the Democrats when it comes to pregnancy termination is with them, it's all or nothing with them. They want to be able to allow pregnancy terminations all the way, to the ninth month. And in some cases, you've heard situations of, after a child has been born, which I think is just crazy. And they want states, and I live in one of them, where there's no restrictions and there's no time limit, there's no time frame. It's just a free for all. And I am vehemently against that. And that's a lot of the problem. When she was speaking to the parties, the right, the left, Democrats, Republicans, I've been saying this on this channel for a little bit. I think the MAGA movement is a little different than the Republican Party because it is a lot more moderate. And that's a lot of the reason why you have RFK Jr. and you have the Tulsi Gabbards who have joined the MAGA movement, not because they would consider themselves conservatives or Republicans. It's because the MAGA movement seems to be a lot more moderate, and it also has the working class and middle class in mind. And that's a large majority of the citizenship here in America. Let's keep it going.
It's like you're saying that Americans don't disagree, but they are polarized by the parties. It sort of feels like that. Do you think that's because the parties are playing to the extremes of their base and therefore taking positions that are stronger than what the average person would want?
We don't have a political divide in America. We have a class divide. And so we have one party that's really getting 70% of the working class, which is the Republican Party. And that's increasingly of all races, the multiracial working class. And then you have the other party, the Democrats, who are catering to the college-educated elites and then the dependent poor. So you have the Democrats sort of taking the economic polls and the Republicans representing the middle. And in this election cycle, it's been fascinating to watch how that class divide has turned into a gender divide, because of course women are 15 points more likely to have a college degree in America now. And so what that does is when you have that college degree in America, you have more access to the American dream, you have more stability in your life, which frees you up to vote on things like abortion or symbolic issues like January 6th. Whereas working class people are really struggling. And so they're very, very focused on economic issues. And Donald Trump really did create an economy that was very protectionist in nature and managed to somehow keep inflation low while working class wages were on the rise for the first time in 60 years. And I think a lot of people are feeling we just want to get back to 2019. It's not like they're trying to get back to some distant racist past as the way, you hear about it, when you turn on MSNBC or CNN or read the New York Times. They just want a little bit more breathing room in an economy that's become very prohibitive for working class people.
Batya, I saw a video where you said that the Democrats are the party of the college-educated woman. What do you mean by that?
So the polarization in this country is really along class lines. You have an educated elite, the top 20%, who now control over 50% of the GDP. So the last 50 years of democratic economic policy has effectively been an upward transfer of wealth from the working class to this educated elite. The left loves to rail against the billionaires. But if you compare the share of the economy that's controlled by billionaires today to the share of the economy that was controlled by billionaires in 1971, which was the high watermark for working class wages, after which they started to drop, has not significantly changed. So what did change? Where did all of that GDP that used to be in the middle class go? It went to the top 20%. Having a college degree has become the gatekeeper of whether you have access to the most modest version of the American dream, home ownership, being able to retire in dignity, your children having the option to get an education, being upwardly mobile, or even just being stable and having adequate health care. These are all things now that are heavily correlated with having a college degree. If you don't have that college degree, you're very likely to be struggling, to be downwardly mobile, to be working 2 jobs, not to have the same protections and the same safety net. And what ended up happening was, starting with Bill Clinton, who signed NAFTA into law, which was a disastrous trade deal that shipped 5 million very good paying working class jobs overseas to build up China and Mexico's middle class. You then had President Barack Obama, who defunded vocational training in schools, which meant that this wonderful avenue to the middle class, for people who are not studious, for people who don't like to sit and study for hours and hours on end, who are not good at listening to authority and sitting in the front row of the school and answering every question and studying algebra and Shakespeare, these people still had an avenue to the middle class through the sweat of their brow and their brawn, very much associated with masculinity and men. And so these two, the factory jobs and vocational training, these were two very good avenues for working class men into the middle class that were destroyed by successive Democratic administrations. And then, of course, both parties had a very lax immigration policy, which meant that we were routinely shipping in millions and millions of low-wage competition for working class Americans.
She's absolutely right. And now here we are today in 2025 with a shortage of tradesmen. We need more electricians, more plumbers, more welders, more HVAC techs. We need more of them. We need more people willing to go out there and work in construction. We need more people to work with the Bobcats and work with construction equipment, crane operators, the big boom crane operators. Those are in need, and these are really good, high-paying jobs, not to mention the people who work on the alarm sprinkler systems and things of that nature. These are great positions, but for whatever reason, well, she mentioned it because vocational programs had the money taken from them. And then the flip side of that too is that a lot of these schools, they pushed college over trade school. They pushed college over vocational programs. And that is a problem. Because the reality of it is everybody isn't college bound. That was something that was told to me way back in the 90s. Everybody isn't a college bound individual, but there were still avenues for people to get out here and go earn an honest living. That's a fact, man.
And it's very interesting because at the same time that these economic policies were being put in place, what you had was this discourse in the 80s and 90s arise around toxic masculinity, right? This idea that somehow being a macho man, being a provider, being the head of a family, being a man who protects and supports and hits on women in bars and knows, mating rituals and excels at them, that this was somehow poison. And it's my view that this discourse took off because it was operating as an alibi for the left, for the fact that they were destroying the self-esteem, but also the ability of men to provide for families and heavily weighting the economy in favor of women who go to college, who are more studious, who have more social skills, in favor of this knowledge economy that rewards women and men who excel at more sort of feminine qualities like, social science, social qualities that you need in these sort of laptop desk jobs. You know how to, respond nicely to people who ask you for things. You know how to sit for long hours staring at a screen.
Talking on a podcast.
Talking on a podcast, being very, good with authority, knowing how to climb the corporate ladder by pleasing your higher ups and all of this stuff. So in my view, that's sort of how what we're seeing right now really is the culmination of that, of the class divide and the gender divide really sort of becoming one and the same.
And I've seen you talk about this, where you talk about, and I think it's a great example, which is the meatpacking industry. Can you talk about that? Because I found that fascinating, the way you described it.
Meatpacking used to be the job to have. You would have a town where the economy was really built around a meatpacking plant. A lot of the men, a lot of the women would get employed there. The wages were incredible. The hours were incredible. The retirement was incredible. When you got that job, you knew that you were going to be able to support a family and retire in dignity and have a home and have a truck and maybe have a pool in the backyard. These were amazing jobs. And you look at who is doing those jobs now. It is teenagers who have been trafficked here, who are enslaved to the cartels who brought them here from failed socialist countries in South America and Central America. Mm-hmm. They get a bracelet when they start making the journey, and that bracelet has a color, and the color tells you how much money they owe the cartels. We know that 50% of the women who have made that border crossing admit to being sexually assaulted. So you can imagine what the actual number is. We are importing slaves and sex slaves. A lot of them are children, and that is who is now packing the meat. They are almost entirely staffed by undocumented, often underage workers. It is absolutely appalling. And this was 100% by design. So every time Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the head of the Department of Homeland Security, who's supposed to be in charge of securing the border, was hauled before Congress or before the Senate, and they asked him, why is the border open? He would say to their faces, our corporations are desperate for workers. It has become the Democrats' party line that without a caste of slaves, our economy cannot survive. And it's absolutely appalling because there is a direct correlation between downward mobility for the working class and the rise of immigrants. So you look at 1971, again, the sort of high watermark for working class wages. We can say, okay, what was working there that stopped working so that the wages stagnated and then began to decline precipitously when you factor in inflation? The share of the population here that was foreign born was 4%. Today, it is 15%, the highest it's ever been in American history. The last time it got close to this, it was 14%, and that was the Gilded Age, a time in American history that is characterized by radical inequality, by an oligarchic rich, and then the masses and masses of poor people competing at the bottom of the income distribution. And again, the Democrats very cleverly developed a language and a discourse to hide their crimes. The alibi was this time, well, we'll call the white working class racists because they oppose mass immigration. So if you're a man and you've seen your good job shipped overseas, and then you've seen millions of competitors brought in to compete with the jobs that are left here, and you objected to that, you were called xenophobic or racist for objecting to the selling out of your children's future. And this worked so well because Donald Trump showed up at exactly the right time. And if you remember his signature promise from his 2016 campaign, it was build the wall. He was effectively saying to millions and millions and millions of working class people, there's nothing wrong with you for objecting to the fact that you cannot support your family anymore. We're going to restore dignity to you and to your labor. And I'll just make one more very quick point, which is that in so doing, in saying, they're racist for objecting to immigration, in erasing the distinction between citizen and non-citizen, this was much easier to do the first time around because Trump did very, very well with the white working class and much worse with people of color. You look at how he's polling now. And of course, we'll know the reaction. We'll know whether this turned out to be true, but I feel pretty certain that he's going to do very well with Black voters. He's going to do very well with Hispanic voters. He's polled as high as 40% of Black voters, which is it's unimaginable for a Republican at this point. You talk to Black voters. I talk to Black voters in the book, and you can hear them talk about this stuff, why they're drawn to him, why they feel disgusted with the Democratic Party for how it emasculates men. He's polling a majority of Hispanic voters and overwhelmingly working class community. Now that the working class that he represents is truly multiracial and multi-ethnic, the whole edifice of this, you're racist if you object to mass immigration has really crumbled.
That was a masterclass, and that was masterfully said. And she's absolutely right. While the left wants to continue people down this road of racism, the true reality of the war is class. It's really a class issue. It's not about race. It's about class. And the reality of it is that they want to push us more and more towards, this class divide of the have and the have-nots, like what you see in Europe and what you see in a lot of nations around the country, around the world. That's what they want. So the left, they've been playing this game, and it has worked up until probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And a lot of people had the scales removed over the previous 4 years, during the Biden-Harris administration to see, hey, this isn't about the race. This isn't about that. This is about class. And you can see it happening. And she discussed it. They're bringing all these people over. They're lowering their wages. Come on, man. Slavery. They literally have people over here, young people, undocumented, working in these factories. And there was a time, man, my uncle, man, him and his wife, they owned their house outright. He worked at a factory. And I know plenty of people that worked at had warehouse jobs and things of that nature, and they were able to provide for their families, and they did extremely well for themselves. And the left, in their wickedness, in their wicked games, they fundamentally changed America. But I am hoping that President Trump is able to turn the ship all the way around and really put the focus more or less on a working class and middle class America, and the thought of rebuilding, that area. I want to hear from you guys in the comment section. Like, share, subscribe, turn the notifications on so you never miss an upload. This was awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Keep God first. Stay prayed up. We'll catch up with you all next time.
Vibes so